You're on.
Hi, and welcome to Channel 99 News. I'm your anchor, Steve.
And I'm your anchor, GF.
And today we will be talking about world history and traveling to 4 different regions of the world and talking about how the characteristics of each region and how they impacted the regions around them. The first region we'll be visiting is Constantinople with our third anchor, Farley. Back to you, Farley.
Hi, I'm your news anchor, Farley. Not Fartley. And today I am in Constantinople. Constantinople was a major trade city in the Eastern Orthodox. What's Eastern Orthodox, you might ask? Well, in 1054, the Great Schism happened, which created a huge gap between the Eastern Orthodox and the Roman Catholic Church. The Great Schism happened because of a disagreement by the authority of the Pope. The Byzantine Empire was ruled by a theocracy. Theocracy is when religion impacts the government much more than it does today. Because of this, religion overtook the decisions and influences of the Byzantine Empire. This also led to the expansion of the Hagia Sophia, a great church founded in the Byzantine Empire.
Whoa! Constantinople's pretty cool. Thank you, Farley, for your visit to Constantinople. Next, we'll be visiting Jeff in
Southeast Asia.
We're here in Southeast Asia. The first thing we're going to talk about is the Grand Canal. It was built during the Sui dynasty. It transported rice from the river valley to northern China, where there was not as much of abundance of food, and to the capital. This allowed for a demographic and population growth, which was good for China. This also increased trade. More on that later. Second thing we're going to talk about is the tributary system, and that was set up during the Tang dynasty. Korea, Vietnam, and Japan all had to pay tribute to China, and this is how the tributary system worked. How it worked is there would be one country, which was China, who viewed itself as a middle kingdom, which meant they thought the whole world revolved around it. Sorry, China, not true. But they would conquer other places, and then the other places would give them goods and money as submission. Another thing was the kowtow ceremony, which another leader of Vietnam would bow their head until it touched the ground. It represented total submission to China. The last thing we're going to talk about is gunpowder and guns. Gunpowder allowed them to have guns, which gave them warfare edge, and fireworks, which was new and cool. It also made them people wanted to trade with them more because they knew warfare technology. And there is evidence that the Abbasid traded with the Tang dynasty. Thank you.
How was your trip, Jeff?
Don't talk to me, Fartley.
Alrighty then. Our next trip will be in Sub-Saharan Africa.
With Steve. Thanks for coming. Love you all. Please like, comment, subscribe to my channel. Links in the description box below. That to you, Steve.
Hi, and welcome to Sub-Saharan Africa. First, we will be talking about the Bantus. Bantus migrated from West Africa, and they brought an agricultural economy and produced a surplus of food. But the Bantus also brought malaria, not so good. The Bantus had close-knit matrilineal villages, and they believed in ancestor veneration and practiced storytelling. Next, we'll be talking about Mali, Ghana, and just Mali and Ghana. Ghana was located on the western African coast and had its peak from the 8th to 11th century. They traded gold and ivory with Muslim traders and had a centralized government. Mali profited from gold trade, had a mainly agricultural society, and its major city was Timbuktu. Mansa Musa was a political and religious leader during this time. Mali connected West and North Africa through trade, and spread Islam throughout West Africa. The Swahili syncretic language also developed during this time, and Swahili was a Bantu language melded with an Arabic language, caused by the presence of Islamic merchants on the Indian Ocean coast. Today, Swahili is spoken by various groups in African Great Lakes region. The bananas and iron were two important inventions during this region as well. Bananas led to a spike in the Bantu population because they were nutrient-rich and allowed Bantus to migrate where yams could not be grown. And iron allowed them to make efficient tools and weapons and allowed the Bantus to conquer other civilizations. Back to you, Farley and Jeff.
Well, Sub-Saharan Africa was a wild ride, if you know what I mean. How about them camels, guys?
I don't know. Next up, we will be visiting Western Europe with
Jeff. Thank you.
It's Jeff. Welcome to Western Europe. First, we're talking about the Carolingian dynasty, which was started by Charles Martel, the same guy that defeated the Muslims in the Battle of Tours, which was significant because it halted Muslim expansion into Europe. After the Battle of Tours, he united the Frankish kingdom into one centralized rule. Next, the next biggest ruler was Charlemagne, who was Charles Martel's grandson. Charlemagne's main achievement was promoting religious-based education because not many people could read in Europe at the time, so that was huge. He also had regional administrators help him rule his large empire, which was large for European standards. And the Carolingian dynasty soon fell after Charlemagne's son because he did not have a good heir. Feudalism was not only a social structure, but the way of life in Europe. How it worked is there was a king who would give land to lords who would give their land to lesser lords. Anyone who owned land that belonged to someone else was called a vassal, and serfs were the foundation of it because they were the people that actually worked the land. Serfs did not have a lot of rights. They were basically slaves with another name. The one big thing about feudalism that made it bad is it was decentralized. Even though there was a king, everyone was more loyal to the lord than the king, and even though there was a king, he had very little political power, if any. Next, we're talking about the Vikings, who were huge in Europe. They had many European settlements, such as ones in England, Ireland, France, and Belgium. They traveled in long ships, which could travel on shallow rivers, which made it easier to raid cities on land. And finally, they made inroads to Russia, which allowed Western Europe to keep in contact with Constantinople. Thank you. Back to you guys. Does your rice not grow fast enough? I'm looking at you, Uncle Ben. Get Chopper rice, the quickest growing rice in all of China, and now the world. All you do is take some rice and throw it, and it grows so fast. In a blink of an eye, you just have rice. It's great. And what's significant about it is it allowed populations to grow in China. So before you only had one kid, now you have 6. Wow! We love population growth. Chopper rice. Only $99.99 a month.
Hi, welcome back to Constantinople, and brr, is it cold out here. So next in Constantinople, we're talking about Justinian. Justinian was the great ruler of the Byzantine Empire. He was even seen as godlike. One of the greatest accomplishments of Justinian was the expansion of the Hagia Sophia, the great church that we mentioned before. He also did a revival of the codes and laws found there, which led to Justinian's code that we know today. He also expanded the Byzantine Empire to the great land that we know or have learned. After Justinian's rule, however, the empire was invaded and little was left. However, all over the empire we found monasteries ruled by monks and nuns who revived Roman texts. However, education was only very present in the Western Europe. In Kievan Rus, which are city-states found in Russia, they were ruled by Vikings, and the rulers were named Rus. These Vikings invaded Western Europe, and the settlement on the Dnieper River was later called Kievan Rus. These city-states could govern themselves but had to pay tribute. And they later converted to Christianity due to the Byzantine missionaries. And because of this, the two empires became linked culturally, economically, and in education. One of the change in the region was government decline. Because of theocracy, religion became so present that the rule of the kings and everything just declined so much. However, one of the continuities was the rule and authority of the church. It never really ended. Thanks.
Welcome back to Hangs Out. First, we're going to be talking about patriarchy, which was the major continuity in the region of China, because women were always subordinate from the beginning of ancient China and classical China all the way to modern day China. Women are still seen as subordinate. In the Tang Dynasty, however, the practice of foot binding started where women would actually bind their feet to make it smaller to adhere to Chinese society. It made women even more subordinate because women could not walk. Next, we'll be talking about syncretic beliefs. There is Zen Buddhism, which was a combination of Taoism and and Buddhism. And then there's Neo-Confucianism, which was a combined belief of Confucianism and Buddhism. However, later Buddhism was persecuted by later dynasties. Fun time. Not actually. Don't quote me on that. Next, we're going to be talking about trade. Hangzhou was a major trading city because of demand. China had things that no one else in the world did, like silk and gunpowder. Because of that, everyone wanted to trade with China, which made Hangzhou which allowed Hangzhou to grow in commercial wealth. The second to the final thing is the change in the region was the dynasties. As we know, China always had new people coming and ruling in and out. For instance, the Tang dynasty ruled from one region for another, but before that it was the Sui and after it was the Song. And finally, we're talking about sinification, which is when other countries such as Korea would mold their culture to be more like China's. So for instance, they would teach Chinese in schools and often model cities and palaces after that of the Chinese. Thank you. Back to you guys.
Welcome back to Sub-Saharan Africa. Today we'll be talking about Timbuktu. Timbuktu is an important city of trade and education that developed into a center of Islamic life in Africa. Timbuktu became a world-renowned center of Islamic learning, and by the 1500s, books cost more than most goods in Timbuktu. Mansa Musa was known for his religious leadership, and he was a devout Muslim known for the elaborate and extravagant pilgrimage to Mecca, where he distributed gold sporadically to all who joined him on his journey. Mansa Musa established religious schools and mosques throughout Western Africa upon his return from his pilgrimage. Zimbabwe was a very powerful Eastern Africa kingdom and built prosperity on agriculture, trade, and gold, especially gold. Great Zimbabwe was the large stone wall surrounding Zimbabwe made without mortar, and it surrounded many of the city's royal buildings, which were made out of stone instead of wood. Slaves and women in sub-Saharan communities were patriarchal, and sub-Saharan communities had their own gender norms that were adapted from Islamic gender norms. Slaves were an important labor source, and the arrival of Islam increased the amount of slaves that were already there. Slave trade along the Trans-Saharan trade route and Indian Ocean trade routes was popular, very popular, and slaves were used not only on farms but also as servants and concubines. A major change in the region was the religion from Christianity to Islam, caused from the Islamic merchants trading with sub-Saharan African regions, and the continuity was trade, which was always there, and slaves, who only increased with the increase of Islam. Thank you. Back to you.
Welcome to our second visit in Western Europe. We are first going to talk about the Crusades, which was against the Western Catholics in Europe and the Muslims in the Middle East. They were both fighting for Jerusalem, and Jerusalem is very significant because it has a very, because it's considered the holy cities in both Christianity and in Islam. And it was also Jerusalem that prompted the Crusades, and that's pretty relevant. That's pretty relevant because there were like 8 Crusades, and that was a large chunk of history. So, well, the Muslims did technically win because they were the ones who gained control of Jerusalem. The Europe's heavily benefited because they got to see the Muslim advanced culture, such as their advanced education, trade, and Arab technology, which they then incorporated into their European way of life. The Crusades are also known as the Holy Wars. Next, we're going to talk about Marco Polo, but more for him later because there's an interview. Next, we're going to talk about the Black Death. The Black Death, it was a plague that spread by trade that came originally into Italy, and it killed 1/3 of European population. It had religious significance because people thought it was a punishment from God, and it destroyed feudalism because there were no people to work. And therefore, because there were less serfs, the Romanian serfs who survived the plague or did not get it had more power because they got to choose who they got to work for, and therefore that gave them more rights. So the change in the region of Western Europe was feudalism. Well, for a majority of its time, feudalism was very popular and was the way of life, but however, there were times where feudalism fell, and it fell right after the Black Plague, which was around the 14th century, I believe. And the continuity in the region is Europe was always Roman Catholic. The amount of influence the church had always varied, but majority of Europe in this time were always the Roman Catholics, which is the original religion that schismed from Eastern Orthodox. Thank you.
Good. I'm here to talk about the camel saddle. Is your camel too lumpy? Well, not anymore. Introducing the camel saddle. And today we have a demonstration, boys and girls. Come here. Huh? Over here we have a camel.
This is our camel, and this is our camel saddle. If you would please hold the camel's attention. Thank you. So first you take your camel saddle and you put it on the camel. Good. And the camel saddle was actually a very convenient invention which allowed for long distance trade and made camels easier to ride so that they were able to go longer distances and longer time. Thank you, camel saddle.
Have a nice day.
5 years today.
Farley. And today I'm here with Justinian. How you doing, Justinian? Awesome. Today we have a couple questions for you. First one, as you know, you're often seen as godlike. Any thoughts on this?
Well, Constantinople was a theocracy, so while I was the ruler of, the political stuff, like the city and the trade, I also was head of the church. So people often associate...
Awesome, moving on.
Okay.
What was your greatest accomplishment?
Building the Hagia Sophia and the Justinian law codes. Those were both really great.
Awesome. Next one. What would you hope for the Byzantine Empire after you pass?
To not be as good as when I was ruling it, because we all know I was the best.
Too bad, it's going down after you die. Thanks for coming.
I'm Steve, and today I'm here with Mansa Musa in Northern Africa.
Salam.
Mansa Musa, please describe your pilgrimage for us.
It was really great. I met a lot of people. I gave to the poor, but in the end I caused inflation.
Yes, you did. Mansa Musa, how is life as a Muslim living in Africa?
I love my people. I think it is very good. We have free education. You should come down sometime.
Interesting. Thank you, Mansa Musa. Back to you guys.
Marco Polo. Marco, what's your favorite place you've ever visited?
Probably Hangzhou because of the modernization and the urbanization and the inventions in the modern city of Hangzhou, and it's nothing like we have in Europe.
Now, why do you think that Europeans do not believe your description of Hangzhou?
Because they just thought it was so unrealistic. They're like, oh, that is not their thing, and yet go to Hangzhou, but because everything is there.
Yes, Marco, what do you feel about the game named after you?
Oh, I hear that it's just so not true, but besides that, I go to different cities and I look and I review different cities. Where's Marco Polo? I don't know. Steve here. Today we'll be reviewing a map of the Silk Roads. The Silk Roads was a major trade route stretching all the way from eastern China in Hangzhou up to the northernmost point in Rome and down to Mombasa on the eastern African coast. Some common goods traded on the Silk Roads included silk, porcelain, and teas. I mean spices. We're gonna redo that. All right.
Hi, welcome back.
Here are some comparisons. First thing we're going to compare is Constantinople and Hangzhou. Their main similarity is they were both huge trading centers that became rich through trade in this time period. Difference, however, is how they became this rich and this prosperity through trade. In Constantinople, they gained their richness basically through taxing and importing goods that were either being traded in Constantinople or merchants that were basically passing through to travel to Asia or Europe. And Hangzhou basically became rich through trade because of supply and demand, because the Chinese goods are something that everyone wants, such as porcelain and silk. Even though they were manufactured in other places, they were manually manufactured to a value in China. Now to Fartley.
We also have Western Europe and Tang China. Now, in both of these countries, they have social classes. However, in Europe, they had something called feudalism. Feudalism allowed for social classes to be moved, for people to go up and down. However, in Tang China, with their system of social classes, there was not much movement at all. Their similarities, however, was religion. In both places, religion ruled over the government very greatly. Thank you.